Well, hello there, guys and gals. Unfortunately, it looks like Jub didn't get the Radio Free Innsmouth for this week done on time. So instead, you got your buddy Joel over here, and we're going to be talking about that new Star Wars movie that came out. You know, I thought this was a really good movie, certainly much better than that horrible new Blade Runner movie that came out with all that white supremacist propaganda and, oh wait, what? What's going on out there?
Come on out of there, Joel Silverberg, you degenerate kike!
Oh god, it would seem that we have some sort of crazy person outside attempting to force his way into the studio. Luckily, I have a phone with which I can easily call the Zorg police. Oh god, it's you, Jub. If I give you a couple shekels, can we call this even here, buddy?
Nice try, Shlomo. But what you owe me can't be paid.
Oh god!
With money!
Oh boy, mate! Oh god! Oh, my pancreas! Oh jeez! Oh no! Oh, this is horrible! Please! Oh, please stop! Oh god! Oh god! Oh jeez! Oh god! Oh god! Okay, I promise I won't ever go in your studio again, Jub. Could I please have a few bucks to pay for the extensive work I'm gonna need done on my sternum after that?
Yeah, no, we're not doing that. All right, RFI episode 4? 4, I think, maybe. Probably 4. This week we're going to be talking about a dichotomy that I have noticed exists in black metal primarily, but also in other forms of music. First, let's go over an example of what a dichotomy is in a philosophical sense. And to do that, we will be looking into Friedrich Nietzsche, little Nietzsche, his text, The Birth of Tragedy, where he identifies the Apollinian versus Dionysian dichotomy. So Apollinian he defines as the art of sculpture, and Dionysian is the non-imagistic art of music. So Apollo and Dionysus were both Greek gods. Apollo was a very orderly sort of chap, sun god, god of sculpting and medicine and such, whereas Dionysus was the god of the vine, the woods, drinking, wine, all that kind of stuff. So Nietzsche uses these two gods as figures to demonstrate what he sees as two different strains of aesthetic creation. To quote the learned master, "These two different tendencies run parallel to each other, for the most part openly at variance, and they continually incite each other to new and more powerful births, which perpetuate an antagonism, only superficially reconciled by the common term art, till eventually, by a metaphysical miracle of the Hellenic will, they appear coupled with each other, and through this coupling ultimately generate an equally Dionysian and Apollinian form of art." So there's two different types of art in Nietzsche's eyes. There's the Apollinian stuff, which is sculpture, anything that's very structured and concrete, whereas Dionysian art is very ecstatic and emotional. And his thesis in The Birth of Tragedy is that both of these strains of art are synthesized perfectly in Greek tragedy from writers such as Sophocles and such. The dichotomy I have come up with doesn't necessarily follow the Dionysian versus Apollinian line perfectly, but the two halves of it roughly correspond to each of those. So for me, the half of black metal and musical composition in general that corresponds to the Apollinian art of structure would be something that has a narrative to it. So it's part A, goes to part B, goes to part C, that kind of thing. You'd see an example of that might be like a symphony or an opera. Most death metal is Apollinian to a fault. It's very much just stacks of riffs, one after the other. Whereas the Dionysian counterpart might be seen as something that I haven't even really come up with a name for yet, which in itself speaks to how Dionysian it is. Basically, you have a central idea in your music that is kind of meditated on, and then you shift layers of it around. So you're staying within sort of like the same matrix of ideas, and instead you're just kind of poking it in different directions. Brett Stevens, not the faggy one that writes for New York Times.
Let's give them a helicopter ride, okay?
Rather, we are speaking of the guy that used to write a whole bunch of death metal stuff, and now he runs America.org, which is sort of a line-straddling site between the NRX stuff and more alt-right philosophizing. That guy was a big influence on me getting into right-wing politics in general on his old black metal website. And on that old black metal website, when he was talking about the Darkthrone album Transylvanian Hunger, he said what differentiated it from other more narrative-based music at the time was that instead of building up to a point, you're sort of immersed in the point itself, if that makes any sense. An example of this kind of songwriting you guys might be a bit more familiar with is the Zurius song Dying Society, where you have sort of a very meditative melody that's central to the song, and then he kind of pokes and prods at it from different angles and shifts different layers of sound that run counterpoint to the main melody. Another example of this in the classical music realm might be Baroque music, where you have like a theme and variations being very important to a lot of the pieces written back then. In a black metal context, an album that recently has typified this for me has been Nocturnity's Harps of the Ancient Temples. Nocturnity spelled N-O-C-T-E-R-N-I-T. So like Nocturne and Eternity. They did a thing there. Pretty clever. I thought it's a good band name. Anyways, this guy's been around for a while, but he releases albums very sporadically. His covers have very interesting aesthetics for black metal. They are black and white photos of him in full Grecian armor, or rather sort of like a Grecian helmet with more medieval plate, and they're high contrast, so you can see the reflection of light off of the armor. And he's usually just doing some kind of pose, like swinging a sword at you or something. But it's very minimalist. There'll just be fog in the background or whatever, and just him coming at you with that sword or crossing his arms in disapproval at posers. So those covers are great, and this album is also great. I'm glad he's back in the game. It's been over 10 years since the last Nocturnity full length, and this one picks up where that one left off. So what he does is he takes kind of a Burzimic style of black metal and simplifies it even more, so where it's just based around one musical idea in each song. And there's been other bands that have done this too, like Bezal's Diver and Ruins of Everast. But what sets apart Nocturnity is that he manages to do that in a very succinct manner, so none of these songs even approach like the 10-minute epics that you would expect for this style of black metal. But at the same time, they're simple, but they're not simple-minded. The layer shifting that's going on is really impressive. The command of sound he has almost makes me think he's kind of like a black metal Brian Eno. He has a great ear for ambiance. So if you've tried Burzum and thought it was interesting but a bit too long-winded and boring, this might be a nice band for you to check out, because they're sort of like bite-sized Burzum, if that makes any sense. Good stuff. Go buy it. This pairs nicely with Algernon Blackwood's short story Ancient Sorceries. So Algernon Blackwood was a major H.P. Lovecraft influence, and in fact, Mr. Howard Phillips said his favorite weird tale of all time was Algernon Blackwood's The Willows, which of course is a must-read, but I actually like Ancient Sorceries a little bit more. Algernon Blackwood was most similar in outlook to Arthur Machen as far as H.P. Lovecraft influences go, compared to the kind of stuffy, ironic, slightly humorous academicism, that's not a word, of M.R. James, or the overflowing romanticism of R.W. Chambers. He was big into nature, spirituality, mysticism, like I said before. He's always talking about elemental spirits. His tales are very slow and they're slow, but they're well paced, because it's not really like the big bad jumps out at you. It's more like he slowly shifts things to become weirder and weirder over time. So this goes along very well with the slowly shifting composition style of a band like Nocturnity. In the story Ancient Sorceries, this story, more than any other Algernon Blackwood story, is perfect realization of the transition from normalcy to a mingled sense of horror and ecstatic revelation. It deals with paganism, Satanism, old medieval, dusky, cobwebbed up castles in France. Really good shit. To quote from this story, the world, of course, asks for some plausible basis to which it can attach credence. Something it can at least pretend to explain. The adventurous type it can understand. Such people carry about with them an adequate explanation of their exciting lives, and their characters obviously drive them into the circumstances which produce the adventures. It expects nothing else from them, and is satisfied, but dull, ordinary folk have no right to out-of-the-way experiences, and the world, having been led to expect otherwise, is disappointed with them, not to mention shocked. Its complacent judgment has been rudely disturbed. Such a thing has happened to that man? It cries. A commonplace person like that? It is too absurd. There must be something wrong. Yet there could be no question regarding that something did actually happen to little Arthur Vizine. Something of a curious nature he described to Dr. Silence. So I honestly don't want to go into the plot too much more than that, because this story, like I said, is so masterfully crafted. Even untangling the little details of it more than that would spoil a lot of what makes this story great. Just the kind of way you discover what is going on gradually, and the twists and turns obviously are important, but also just the really good grasp on atmosphere Algernon Blackwood has. Pairs very nicely with the exceptional grasp of atmosphere that Nocturnity has. So go check both of those out. Listen to the music, read the story, have a good time. I'll see ya, I guess.
いいか、息が止まるまでとことんやるぜ。息が止まるまでだとどういうことだ。